Welcome to Rambam In-Depth. Today we'll be discussing the Rambam Hilchos Maaser Perek Yud Beis, Halacha Aleph, and Halacha Beis. In Halacha Aleph, the Rambam says, "Alekeich peiros mimi she'ein nemen ala maasers." Someone who purchases produce from someone who is not believed in the laws of tithing. He's not credible. And b'shachach la'asra, and he forgot to tithe them, because that's the halacha. When you buy it from someone who's an am haaretz, it's called Demai, and you have to tithe it again. So what happened over here? V'nichnas Shabbos a Yom Tov she'eni yachal la'aser. Now it's either Shabbos and Yom Tov, and you can't tithe. Harizeh shayla. You ask him on Shabbos, the amalei musar hein, and if he says yes, they were tithed, even though normally we don't trust this person. In this case, eichel al piv b'Shabbos. You can eat based on his word on Shabbos. Then the Rambam continues, likewise, if someone else, not the person who sold it to you, but someone else who's not credible either, and he says musar and hain, that they were tithed, the same thing. Shabbos, you can eat based on his testimony and that Shabbos. However, the Rambam continues, even though he's allowed to eat from that produce on Shabbos, because we believe him on Shabbos, if any of that is left over in Motzaei Shabbos, you can't eat it. Only on Shabbos you can eat it. There was a heter that was given for Shabbos. They were only lenient and believed this unreliable person only for the purpose of that Shabbos. So Beis Yosef asked the question. Later on in Halacha Yud Zayin, the Rambam talks about a person who's chashud, who's not trustworthy, who's suspect, who testifies about someone else. He's believed. Why? So there's a chazaka, there's machlekes in the Gemara, but the halacha is that chazaka ein adam chayte v'lo. A person does not sin unless they get some benefit if it's not for yourself. If you want to sin for yourself, it's one thing, but you're going to sin for someone else, and that we don't suspect you of doing, unless there's some actual benefit you get from it. The Rabbi in Hilchos Maaser says the same thing. If you're suspected about a certain matter, and you can't be relied upon when you're talking about your own claim, but if it's for someone else, you could. The Rambam writes that Hilchos Maaser, there's a presumption that a person will not sin, so others should benefit. And therefore, Neman Am Haaretz Leimer Pelis Kleinin Musar, and Am Haaretz is believed to say so-and-so's produce was tithed. So the question the Beis Yosef asks, why is it that this person who testified, who's not reliable, he testified that this person's produce was tithed, can eat it on Shabbos, only why not Motzaei Shabbos? So the Lechem Mishneh gives a balabatish answer. He says that a person who is suspected that he'll violate a prohibition is believed to testify about others. That's in a normal case where you're testifying about someone else's produce. But in the case over here about someone who sold produce, the fact that you're testifying about him, that he is reliable, that he had tithed, that doesn't prove that it's true. Why? Because there are amharatzin, not reliable people, who tithe, and some who don't tithe. So the person who's testifying is maybe one of those who does tithe, so he assumes that the one who sold it is also one of those people that he would tithe. But it could be that he really isn't. So it's not a question of his reliability, but we're assuming that when he's testifying about someone else, he's projecting his own approach that he would tithe to someone else who's selling it. That's why on Shabbos they're mekel, lenient because of covered Shabbos. But if it's not for eating on Shabbos, then there's no reason to be lenient. Chasam Sofer in his Chedushim and Masechta Chulin, Tafheim and Beis, gives a very interesting answer. He says it is a machlekes really if we use this presumption. Rabbi Meir says that if you're suspected to transgress, you can't testify about someone else. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says you can, and the halacha is like Rabbi Shimon Gamliel. What is the machlekes hinge on? This klal, this rule that a person does not sin unless it's for himself, that's a majority thing. Majority of people will not sin unless they benefit for it for themselves. But if there's no benefit for themselves, they won't sin in referring to someone else's behavior. He says that's true because it's the majority. But Rabbi Meir is chayshel miyut, and Rabbi Meir doesn't follow majority. Rabbi Meir is concerned about the miyut, the minority. And therefore, he holds that you can't believe him because we have to consider the minority. But the halacha is that we do go by the majority. Why? Because kol deparish meruba parish. Whenever situation arises, we assume that it came from the majority. And so this person is from the majority that we assume that he won't sin if it's not for his own benefit. That's regarding general laws about trustworthiness of a person who's not trustworthy when he testifies about others. But Demai is a separate category. Demai is a rabbinical law that even though majority of the Amiratzim do tithe, here we're supposed to go by the minority. The Chachamim concerned about the minority, just like Rabbi Meir would. It's contrary to the way it is throughout the entire corpus of Halacha. And that's why, in this case, they didn't trust you if you're testifying that the produce was tithed, because the fact that the majority does that is not enough. We have to go by the minority. And therefore, his testimony is not accepted.